Hi, thanks for joining me today. Welcome to How to Transition from Primary to Middle School Writing. My name is Lorena Townsend, and I'm the author of Write by Number. I'm a former classroom teacher. I've homeschooled my 5 kids from kindergarten through high school. And in those years, I've also taught English to other homeschooled kids. The curriculum I have just written is a summary of how I teach writing in all those situations. I've never used any other way to teach kids to write because this has been universally successful for me. If you want the whole curriculum laid out for you, you can buy my curriculum, but you can easily look at the principles I use and apply them to your own writing instruction. So that's what I'm going to give you today. I'm going to show you how to move from having your students write one sentence to writing paragraphs to writing essays. So I'm going to make a quick transition here because we are using Zoom to record this because we're in interesting times right now. Okay, so the first step in this writing process is that you have to think about teaching writing in a different way. There might be other methods and curriculums that are similar to this that perhaps have become popular since I started teaching in the early 1990s, but I don't know about them because once I started doing it this way, I never looked back. It was so successful and it was so easy to administrate as a teacher that I haven't given other methods a glance since then. So the usual way of teaching writing to kids is, first of all, you start with a physical act of writing, and then you jump as quickly as possible into getting them to write as much as possible. Usually this involves a method I call see and do. So you read a short story, you write a short story. You read a poem, you write a poem. In addition, state legislative standards for writing are rarely in line with the natural development of language skills and mental processes. So for example, children are very literal. So when we have state standards that are asking children who are literal to understand things like metaphor and symbolism and analyze their uses, that does not match up with where a lot of kids are, and they get frustrated and they're unable to complete the tasks. Yes, true, there are kids who can pull it off, but the majority cannot. So you also might think of young boys who developmentally, their fine motor skills develop more slowly, and they're trying to perform just the simple task of writing with a pencil. So I believe that the overall goal of teaching writing has to be to move at the pace of the child's own development. So if you agree with me, you're going to like this way of doing things. And if you don't, honestly, this method is going to frustrate you because it's not going to move fast enough for you. So when we move at the child's pace, this allows differences in personality and giftedness to dictate the pace of learning instead of outside standards. And I know that's very much against the grain of the way we set up our school system. And I totally get why we have to set up a school system the way we do. We have to be able to move millions of kids through specific subject matter. And that's the way you have to do it. But any classroom teacher or parent will tell you that it's beyond frustrating to try to teach kids a concept or a skill that they just aren't ready to do. So for example, my youngest son was in kindergarten in public school when we went through FOST-Adopt for him, and he could barely speak English, and he didn't know his alphabet, and he couldn't count to 20, and he couldn't hold a pencil. He couldn't walk up and down stairs without assistance. He was so developmentally behind. He couldn't even walk in a straight line. But because he was in kindergarten, the teacher had an obligation to make sure he could write one sentence by the end of kindergarten. So she had him practice copying that one sentence over and over and over until he could write a sentence. Now, he didn't know what the sentence said. He didn't know really what each of the letters were called, but he could write a sentence by the end of kindergarten. We don't want to do that, right? Another example of how this pacing doesn't work when you want to match it to a child is that the kid at the other end of the bell curve, the kid that's way ahead and is reading and writing before they even enter kindergarten. And so because the state standard says one sentence by the end of kindergarten, he's stuck practicing that one sentence over and over because that's what the class is doing. So both of these kids end up hating writing because to them it's a futile task, right? This is why we move kids from writing one sentence to writing essays. Why that? the way we have it set up has to change. We need to meet them where they are developmentally and build not only skills, but a positive experience with writing. Because we don't use mastery as a pacing tool, very few students actually love writing. They dread writing assignments. So of course, the ones who look forward to the writing assignments are the natural writers, the ones who have the skill and the positive experiences with writing. So on the other hand, if you start simply and build from the bottom up, no matter what the age of the student, making each step attainable and objectively measurable, you can really change a student's attitude about writing and the ability to write. As a teacher or parent, we're not much better at how we view teaching writing. We hate grading writing as much as they hate writing. So this is why very few teachers, even English teachers, will assign long writing assignments. They simply don't have the time to grade the writing. And if they do assign writing, they just read through it and they don't make corrections. They give what I call an impression grade or a content grade. They just can't spend the time correcting every typo, every grammar error, and making suggestions on how to reorganize the information and anything else that needs to be done. So besides the time issue, most teachers aren't equipped to grade writing because they themselves can't quantify this in their own writing. So I was an English major. I have a master's degree in English. I've been with lots of other English majors in my lifetime, lots of other English teachers. And I can tell you that there are a lot of English teachers who don't write well. They can't spell. They don't understand grammar. They don't see typos well. And usually they're the ones that are really gifted in discussing and analyzing literature. They're much more on the artistic ends of language. But those are the teachers that are going to end up grading for content and concepts and not doing corrections. So how do we solve this mess? Again, I'm going to give you a fairly simple way to tackle all these problems. The way I teach writing is through objectively measured assignments with clear, reachable expectations for the student and the teacher. Even if you don't like the pieces of how I teach writing, hopefully in this workshop, you can pick up on some things that might work for you. Because teaching writing this way, the way I'm going to show you, it's very methodical. You might be worried about creativity and self-expression in writing. And here's how you have to think about it. Learning to write is a combination of two things. It's a skill and it's an art. Some writing programs skip the skill part and some writing programs skip the art part. But the reality is that most people, and by most I mean about 90%, aren't going to be creative artistic writers. My experience has been that using this program with natural creative writers only enhances their skills. It definitely doesn't dampen their creativity. In fact, they are because they're forced to write differently than they normally would, they become better writers because it gives them more tools and more styles to choose from. So if you think about teaching writing, like teaching someone to play basketball, perhaps that will help. So we don't hand a basketball to a kindergartner and put him in the middle of a high school game and expect him to have the abilities to play a full court game. We start by giving him a smaller ball and a lower basket, and we first teach him to dribble. Now you can say, oh, that's not basketball, just like you would say, oh, that's not writing. You're right, it's just one skill, and that's the first skill that a kid has to learn in basketball, to dribble. He has to be able to handle the ball to play basketball. He first then has to learn to walk and dribble at the same time, then run and dribble at the same time. So you start simple and you add one complexity at a time. Then you teach him to shoot the ball. And that's a very complicated skill requiring strength and coordination and visual acuity, among other things. So that has to even be broken down into steps. And so then finally, you put it all together and the child learns to do a layup. He dribbles, he runs, he shoots. And when kids first learn that, it's so awkward and stiff. The ball is bouncing off their legs, they trip and they fall, they shoot too late and they hit the underside of the backboard. All sorts of crazy things happen. But it takes a while to take all those individual skills and put them together. Now, I want you to picture your favorite professional basketball player doing a layup. Now that's an art, isn't it? The basic skill is under there. The person isn't traveling. with the ball. They get the ball in the basket, but what they do with their bodies to get the ball there is amazing. They spin, they switch hands, the ball rolls off one side or the hand of the other. It goes around their waists to avoid the defender before it gets popped up in the air and tipped in. And this is exactly what writing should look like. The skills are the underscore, the skeleton to the art. So the other biggest objection I find to teaching writing is that you, the person doing the grading, don't feel competent enough to do editing. And I want to reassure you that you can do it. The nice thing about starting with just one sentence is that you, as the grader, start simple too. So in my book, I give lots of hints on things to watch for and how to edit, but you can easily use the internet for help. You can type the sentences into a word processor, you can use Microsoft Word or something similar and have it do autocorrect, or you can use something like Grammarly. There are a lot of options out there. If you are not actually, if you really can't do it, perhaps English is your second language, or you have a learning disability, or you have a visual impairment, you can hire someone to do the grading. You can trade, you can barter. I'll do this for you if you grade my kids' writing. Or maybe even an older kid who's a great writer. They love doing that kind of stuff. So no matter how great of an editor you are or you are not, you will miss things. So when I was writing my curriculum, and as I looked back on all my stacks of write by number notebooks that I solicited from my former students, I was looking through for student samples. And I had to discard many paragraphs because I had missed correcting little things. A period here, a comma there, a misspelled word there. So just be reassured that you won't be perfect at editing. And this is actually a good thing because it's the best time to model to your students how to deal with imperfect writing. You can be embarrassed and defensive, or you can model excitement at being able to make the needed correction. If you don't know how to spell, model to your students how to look it up and make the corrections. This is a very important part of teaching writing. No matter how good of a writer you are, you will make mistakes, even after you edit something over and over. It's just part of writing. Okay, so that's my background. Let's get started with the actual process. So, what is the most basic component of an essay? Remember, that's our goal here, to start at the very beginning. So you might say letters or punctuation. Yes, that's step one. The person must be able to physically form and write letters and punctuation marks. But once that's done, the next step is to teach words and sentences. And that's where you start teaching the writing process. Don't move from that until the student has that down. This is a key. Don't move from that until the student has that down. If you do it too soon, you will reap the hard parts later. So stage one is to write a sentence. Now, I teach students to write a topic sentence, and I call that a first power sentence. It's a sentence that has all the power and all the control for what comes after. It's the boss. To make it objectively gradable and to build where we're headed, essays, we tell students to use the word to, the number word to, as an anchor. So they're going to write sentences like, I have 2 fruit trees in my backyard, or I went 2 places today, or my bed has 2 animals on it. We are eventually going to expand this into a 3-sentence paragraph, and they will name the 2 things, but remember, you want to start with just 1 sentence. The goal here is that the student is learning to write the words in his natural vocabulary and according to his own interests. This is very motivating for most kids. Don't try to restrict what they write about unless it's really inappropriate. You might be able to give some suggestions or ideas if they ask, but let them come up with their own ideas. Why do I say this? This is where students start to develop their own voice in writing. They learn that they can think thoughts in their head and then put those thoughts on paper. They get used to their own words, not the ones that others tell them that they have to write. So now you as a teacher, that's going to be really difficult because you have a larger vocabulary and you've read a lot. You know what a good sentence or what an interesting sentence looks like. And you will be able to think of better ways to write their sentences or better words to use. Don't make suggestions unless it's really needed. For example, you might have a student who writes, I have two, every day, one day, I have 2 cars, next day, I have 2 boats, next day, I have 2 trees. And they just keep doing that over and over. Every day it's the same pattern. That tells you something about your student. It tells you a lot about where they are in terms of how they think, the strengths or weaknesses of their vocabulary, etc. Something you can do to help that student is to share what other students have written. So if you're in a homeschool setting, other people in the house, or if you're in a classroom setting or a co-op setting, hearing what other students have written. They hear that and they think, oh, I could write that sentence that way. And so they start copying other people's sentences. Or if you're reading a book and you see a sentence that has that kind of structure, you can point out, oh, look at that first power sentence in the here in this book, and you can point to it and show them. You can also write your own sentence. You can sit beside them and write a sentence alongside and then have them grade your sentence. And so they're seeing different ways to do it and seeing different words on the page. So how long do you stay at this stage? You stay here until the student capitalizes the beginning of each sentence, punctuates the end, and gets most of his natural vocabulary words right on a consistent basis. Kids are constantly learning new words and incorporating them into their language. So the first few times the kids write them, they'll get them wrong. But soon, with corrections, they'll learn the spelling and move on. Obviously, older kids are going to be much further along in this, and they won't stay here. If you're starting this process with them, trying to figure out where it went wrong and fix it, you might move through this stage very quickly, or it might be that this is where you have to start. So after the student writes the sentence, correct it, and then have the student rewrite the sentence correctly. This uses muscle and visual memory to learn to write correctly. If a student always writes something incorrectly and all the teacher does is write the correction on the side or give it a grade, the student never actually writes the sentence correctly. And let's be honest, they probably glance at the grade and move on. And then the next day they write another sentence using the same mistakes and they get a grade and nothing ever changes. They do it the same way the next day. And what's actually happening is they're reinforcing the wrong way to do it. So it's like allowing that basketball playing child to learn to dribble once, pick up the ball, take a step, dribble once, pick up the ball, take a step. It's against the rules in basketball. You're actually teaching the child to fail at basketball and keep the child from being able to play a basketball game eventually. So in the same way, do your students a favor and teach them right from the beginning. Learning to correct one spelling error in a sentence is palatable. They usually, once they realize that it's not as hard as they think it's going to be, they do it very easily. But if you wait until the kid is 10 years down the line and has 50 plus spelling errors in an essay, what then? I mean, that is such a frustration to both the student and the teacher. So here I have to insert a plug for those exceptional kids. There are people who don't learn to spell or write easily. Most kids learn to spell by seeing a word spelled correctly and practicing the spelling themselves. Some just need to see it once, some need to see it several times. But there are many people who just can't spell. It might take them 10 times as long to learn to spell, if they ever get that at all. I had one of these in my house. My oldest son is severely dyslexic, and it took years for him to learn to spell his last name. As in, every day he had to write his last name it took 2 years. Because I knew he would have to be able to sign his name. I knew we couldn't use any other compensation like a word processor or anything like that. So if this is the case for a student you have, you'll just have to make a judgment as to when to move on to the next stage. Okay, so once the student can do a first power sentence, add 2 more sentences and make it into a paragraph. Teach the student to indent, which actually doesn't happen in a lot of curriculum. They have to indent, Then add 2 sentences behind the first power sentence. These are called second power sentences because they are the bosses of the paragraph. So here you see there are 2 fruit trees in my yard. One is an orange tree, the other is an apple tree. The words we use to delineate the first and the second thing, I call second power signals. They signal to the reader what the 2 things are. And this is such an accepted form of communication that not many people point this out, or we don't teach this in most curriculum, but you can hear it all the time in speeches and see it in writing. This is how we communicate structure in the English language. So again, you want to be correcting each sentence, and the student should be rewriting any paragraphs that have errors. Because you've already gotten them to the point where they have very few errors in a single sentence, they will have very few errors in 3 sentences. So as they get more creative with their sentences and incorporate more vocabulary and ideas, they will have corrections, like the first time they list 2 titles of a books, or the first time they quote people and learn how to use quotations, or the first time they realize they have to capitalize brands. So the great thing about teaching grammar and writing this way is that it actually allows you to skip all the grammar and usage worksheets and books. So for example, as they start using possessives, they learn the rules for that in the context of their writing. They don't need a worksheet because they're learning it through doing it every day. If you need to, you can teach the overall concepts in a worksheet environment, but in reality, very few people take those concepts and apply them to their writing easily. Of course, you always have the lazy writer who knows how to spell or punctuate correctly, but just won't do it because they can't be bothered to put that much effort into it. And that's why making students write it over if they get it wrong is essential for these kids. They are lazy enough to be motivated to do it right the first time, so they don't have to spend any more time writing it over. So you stick with this 3-sentence paragraph for as long as it takes for them to have minimal errors. And they should be able to just whip out a 3-sentence paragraph without any work. They just don't make the mistake of moving on too fast. You will want to, but you need to keep in mind the long game where you're headed. If you make sure that each student learns this skill completely, you won't have to deal with a meltdown. When you say, write a paragraph on what we just learned in history, they'll know exactly how to create that first sentence. They're not going to look at a blank page and panic. What do I write? How do I start? And on the other end, you won't get those kids writing a page-long sentence that just goes, and then, and then, and then, and then. So if you say, write a 1, 2, 2 paragraph on what we just learned, they know how to do those paragraphs and they can whip that out in a couple minutes. It's an easy assignment and it's super easy to grade that way. This is even more helpful then when you get to stage 3, where you add 2 more sentences to the paragraph. So do you see how we're expanding step by step? We will add 2 sentences called third power sentences. And these sentences give more information about the second power sentences. So it looks like this. There are 2 fruit trees in my yard. One is an orange tree. It produces oranges all year. The other one is an apple tree. The apples are ripe for eating in June. These third power sentences give more information about the second power sentences. Again, so here's your first, this one, right, is giving more information about this one, the orange tree. Okay, it gives more information about the second power sentence. And this one, the apples, about apples, gives more information about this one. So again, students should be rewriting the paragraphs if there are errors, but it will be up to you to judge if you want to allow erasing at this point or if you want them to rewrite the whole thing. It will really depend on the number of errors and the needs of the child, whatever you prefer. And you keep doing this daily until the student does this easily. Okay. Now in Write by Number, we do some writing exercises in the stages, especially in 4 and 5. In stage 4, the students have to practice not using expletive construction at the beginning of any sentences. So they can't use there are, there was, there were, there is. So you can see here that my sentence changed and I no longer start it with there are. Now it says 2 fruit trees grow in my yard, which is a better way to say it. Also, you notice there's no form of the verb to be as a linking verb. And so in my program in stage 5, they have to practice not using any form of the verb to be. This just really starts to push students toward being creative with their sentence structures and seeing that it's possible to say the same things in different ways. One of the problems we encounter in the upper grades is students who won't edit because they think that the one way that they wrote something down is the only way to communicate that particular idea. And if students learn early not to get married to their words, the things they write on the page is not final, it really serves them well later. It really sets them free to be much more creative because they can think of many, many ways to say the same thing, and then they have the tools and they can pick the most beautiful and clear way to say it. So, yeah. All right, next slide. Clear the drawings there. Okay, so in Write by Number, starting in stage 6 and ending in stage 11, I teach something called sentence patterns. And my program has 38 patterns that we cover, and learning each sentence pattern helps incorporate new ways of writing sentences into their writing repertoire and also teaches them grammar. You don't have to use my program to incorporate this concept into your writing instruction, but teaching students to pattern their sentences differently, moving around grammatical structure will really make their writing more interesting. After teaching hundreds of kids this, what I learned about grammar instruction is this. If students are learning the concepts of grammar, but never using them so that they are ingrained into how they think about the words on page, it's just interesting information to them. It's like teaching students 2 + 2 is 4, and they can do that on a piece of paper, but never giving them experience with having 2 apples in one hand and 2 apples in the other hand, and then realizing, hey, when I put them together, there's 4 apples. It's the same thing with grammar. They might be able to tell you that is can be a linking verb or a helping verb, but if they have never had to maneuver the word is in a sentence and see how it works for them, it's meaningless information. Okay, so back to expanding those paragraphs. Now this, honestly, is where most writing instruction stalls. They get kids to write multiple sentence paragraphs, which for most kids is just random sentences grouped in a paragraph form and not organized. And then all of a sudden they jump to essays. And this leap is just too much for most kids because they don't even have any idea of the structure of their writing. So what we want to do is make this transition in stage 7. So first we add 2 more sentences to the paragraph, which makes each paragraph they write 7 sentences long. It has a 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3 structure, and the first power sentence now contains the word 3. So now here's their 1, their first thing, right? So that's the 2. Here's their second power sentence, and then here's their second power sentence. And then this, so now they've already done this much, so now they're just adding a 3rd thing. All right, so now we have an orange tree, an apple tree, and an avocado tree, which is a fruit. So, and I've thrown some sentence patterns in there so you can see that it's much more interesting to read than our first paragraph, which was very simplistic. So remember, the goal in this workshop, though, is to show you how to expand a paragraph in an essay, so I'm going to try to keep it pretty simple. You want to stay at this stage until the students can do this well. Okay, now that you have a 7-sentence paragraph down, the next thing you want to teach students is how to move that first power sentence around because in real and more interesting writing, we don't start off with that first power sentence every time. So in Write by Number, I call these paragraph variations, and we cover them in stage 8, and I teach them 5. I teach them variation A, which is putting that first power sentence last. I teach them B, and this is going to be an important one. You're going to want to come back to this one. And notice that you have the first power sentence. It's a paragraph, sorry. It's going to be a paragraph, but it's going to be a sentence right now there. And then C, how to put it in the middle. D, how to just imply it and skip it all together. And then E, this is the other one we're going to focus on here. And this is a 0 power sentence, which I'm going to explain to you in a minute. Okay, so you do need to emphasize B and E because these are the structures that you're going to most commonly see in upper essay writing. So this B, we have an introduction and we have a conclusion. All right, and 0 power sentences, those are sentences that just give more color and background before we start telling the reader what we want them to hear, but they don't directly relate to the structure. So let me show you what that looks like. Oh, gotta clear the screen, sorry. Okay, so here we have the first part. So this is a B, this is a variation B. And so we have, here's our first introductory sentence, and now here we have an ending sentence. All right, this in the middle stays the same. We still have the same list in the middle, but now the student is learning how to put those two things on either side. All right, let's look at what an E looks like then. So an E gives some background. When my family first bought our house, I dreaded going outside to work in the yard. Forced to do the work daily, however, I changed my mind. Now we see that first power sentence. Now I happily pick fruit off of 3 trees in my yard. And now we go into our first, second, and third trees. But this information here doesn't directly relate to the structure. And so this skill, being able to stick those introductory comments at the beginning, is where we're going to start building interesting first power paragraphs in the end. All right, so if you are teaching your kids on your own and mimicking what I do in Write by Number, be sure to practice all those variations a lot. In Write by Number, we're also adding sentence patterns, so they're practicing the paragraph variations with the sentence patterns. The number of assignments in my book allows for a lot of practice, so if you're applying these concepts on your own, just make sure your students really understand how to move that first power sentence around. All right, now, this is the exciting part. This is the transition from the paragraph to the essay. At long last, we make it here. Now, students love this step because it's so simple, and yet it makes them feel like all of a sudden they've made the leap. So you take that exact same paragraph that they've been writing and you divide it, you just have them divided up into 4 paragraphs. So yes, the first power paragraph, the first power sentence, the first power paragraph might just have 1 sentence. This one doesn't because we have the 0 power ahead of it. But we're going to fix that soon enough. Remember, we're moving towards something. We're going to fix that. But we want it to look like this. And they practice dividing up those paragraphs. They can go back and rewrite, take paragraphs that they've written before and just practice dividing them up. So they see how each number gets its own paragraph. This is my first concept. This is my second concept. This is my third concept, right? There's the third there. All right, and here still is my first power sentence that's telling everybody what I'm going to talk about and how many points I'm going to have. All right, clear all that. All right. In stage 10 then, we take another step toward longer essays. And at this point, students are writing a basic 5-paragraph essay. How did they get there? Duh, it's amazing. So this is the goal of most writing programs. They kind of leave them here at the 5-paragraph essay and call it a day. But to get here, we expand each paragraph to a minimum of 3 sentences. So you have, now you're adding another sentence. So remember, this one was 2 sentences long. Now it's 3 sentences long. This one has a 3rd sentence, and this one has a 3rd sentence. And then this one already had more than 1 sentence in its introduction because it had 0 power ahead. And then there's at least 3 sentences at the end. So you just make sure they do that. Now, you don't want them just adding stuff randomly, but because they've already learned to write 1, 2, 2 paragraphs in this program, it's an easy transition because now this paragraph, clear that, okay. So like this paragraph has the same 1, 2, 2 structure that they did in stage 2. So it's easy. This becomes like a first paragraph, first power sentence, and these just give more information. So they really make that transition easy there, easily. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but that is exactly how you do it. You just add the 3rd sentence to each section. You use that variation B structure so that their essays are 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. And that's why this says it that way there. So they can see how that works. Now, most conclusion paragraphs kids are actually told, introduced by saying, this is what I'm going to tell you, and end with, this is what I told you. And it's really boring to write that, and it's really boring to read that. To solve this problem, what I do at this stage is I actually teach something called first power paragraph themes. You can create your own themes if you want. This is just what I do. This tells your students what to put in the first power paragraphs to make them interesting. So this is what I use. I say, like, you can use theme Q, which is where you use a quotation, or theme I, which is where you ask a question, or you can create a scenario to open it up or end it. You can cite a conflict, like some people say this, some people say that. Hook and reel, this is super popular right now in writing. I'm not sure when it really became the fad. You see this all the time in blog posts and stuff. It's where they have a theme or a hook at the beginning, and then they come back to that exact same theme at the end. It's interesting to see as a writer to watch people doing that. Another one I use all the time is action. It's a call to action. Now that I've told you this, what are you going to do about it, right? Metaphor, have them write a metaphor to explain what they're going to be talking about, or a simile, or make a prediction. If you don't do this, this will happen. If you do this, this is what will happen. So this is a great time. Have them practice that over and over and over again. In my program, they're also learning sentence patterns. And so as they're practicing their sentence patterns, they're also practicing including all of those things. So it really becomes very interesting. It's a lot of fun to read when students get to this point because everything is very objectively measurable. Remember, they either have a quotation in there or they don't. They either have a question in there or they don't. So it's easy to read. All right, next up. So at long last, we arrive at the 8-paragraph essay. So instead of having a 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 essay, we actually split those middle paragraphs up, and it becomes a 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1. So in Write by Number, I teach them what I call third power paragraph functions, and that relates to these right here. All right, and what third power paragraph functions do is they give further illustration. That's the for example part. It offers an argument, like some people say this in argument to what I just told you, but actually, blah, 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 blah. Or it just gives further information, facts, interesting observations, things like that. So I call this opposing as opposed to argument. So this really, really keeps them from writing one long paragraph, and it really, it makes it nice. So you don't have these big, huge chunks in the middle of the essay. All right. So I only took part of the sample essay we were doing. So here's our first point. Remember, first oranges. And notice this is our 3-sentence paragraph. And I encourage students when they're doing Write by Number to not expand too much, because the goal of the program is not for them to write an actual research paper or an essay. This is to practice doing things correctly. So I encourage them to keep it short. But if they want to add 4 or more sentences to a paragraph, that's totally fine. So here's how I split off into, this is a third. So this is a third power paragraph giving more information about this one. So this is information. See if I can write with my mouse. There we go. Information, we're going to abbreviate that. Okay, so it's just giving more information. It's facts and information. If I was to illustrate, I would give an example of something that happened. I would, and then if I was to give an argument, I could say, you know, you could do the most people don't believe it, and then kind of go into that and then explain to them what they did wrong. So yeah, sometimes there's not a really clear, you're kind of doing a little bit of both, but when you're grading, just grade whatever the student says they want you to grade. And if it's in there, it's fine. The goal, remember, is just to get them to make it more interesting. So by learning this 8-paragraph structure, they basically have learned how to expand their writing to any length. They can write a research paper, they can write a book, whatever. They can easily respond to the demands in their academic world with the required shorter pieces like paragraphs or short essays. But now they can sit down and write a 2 to 10 page paper without any angst at all, because they know exactly how to organize it, structure it. They have the pattern in their head ahead of time, and they just have to go in and fill in the blanks. So most of the students I taught were shocked by their ability to write by the time they got to the end of this process. It is such a blessing for these students when they get to college and have to write essays for multiple classes a week, and they can write 2 to 10 essays a week without really thinking that hard about it. And that's if they actually have a teacher who assigns writing. Even my least able writers end up getting good grades on their essays in college because, unlike their classmates, they can write coherently and with proper grammar and spelling and punctuation, which sadly is not the norm. So students might not like this particular structure of learning how to write, but they can do it, and they regrettably always say, "Oh, Mrs. Townsend, I can't believe I'm saying this. You told me I would thank you later. I am. Thank you, thank you, thank you." I get that all the time. So the goal here is that a student has a structure in mind before he starts writing, which keeps his writing organized and on track. And if he has developed the art of writing along with the structure, you don't see the underlying structure. You just see the beauty of the communication. It's like looking at a painting. When it's complete, you don't see the sketch underneath that kept the artist on track. You just see the beautiful painting. I know that that is a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I'm hoping that you can learn something from this, that this was helpful, that for those of you who are watching it during the convention, feel free to stop by my exhibit booth, my online booth. If you have any questions or want to look at how I put those concepts together in an easy to follow program that you can be used in any school setting, homeschooling, co-op, public school, private school, charter schools, it doesn't matter. I will have open booth times where you can drop in and ask questions. I'm happy to help you even if you don't buy my curriculum, because I love teaching kids to write. So if you're watching this after the convention, be sure to go to my website, writebynumber.com, if you want to get in contact to learn more about how to teach this method of writing. So thanks again for joining me, and have a great day.